Food trends come and go, but some live forever in infamy. If you were born anywhere from 1960 and 2022, stick around to learn which questionable culinary fad was most popular during the year you were born. At the beginning of the 20th century, the popular gelatin brand Jell-O saw that customers were making creative salads using their product. In an effort to capitalize on the trend, they released some truly ridiculous savory flavors, including celery, seasoned tomato, and Italian salad. Starting in the 1950s, people had started mixing fruity Jell-O flavors with seemingly everything else, including meat, vegetables, and seafood. Jell-O salads reached a new height at the start of the 1960s. Back then, people came up with elaborate Jell-O creations that would have diners questioning whether they were looking at an edible plate or a work of abstract art. Children of the space age will be instantly transported back to their youth at the mention of Tang. The powdered orange drink was invented in 1957, but its popularity didn't take off until John Glenn brought the drink mix on the Friendship 7 spacecraft during his February 1962 orbit of Earth. The drink wasn't just a novelty, though. It also helped improve the taste of water in space, which was affected by purification chemicals. The orange drink might not be as tasty or nutrient-packed as most modern-day products, but Tang will always elicit pleasant childhood memories for those who grew up drinking it.
Drink Tang, gang! It's Tangerific!
Appetizers like meatballs on a toothpick aren't that ridiculous of a concept. But what about adding grape jelly to the mix? The unconventional recipe, called chafing dish meatballs in the 1960 cookbook Elegant But Easy, a cookbook for hostesses, features raw meatballs simmered in a sauce made of grape jelly and tomato-based chili sauce. The recipe has evolved over time to use pre-cooked meatballs that are assembled with other ingredients in a slow cooker, but the roots were planted in the mid-1960s during the height of cocktail meatball fame. People of all ages are familiar with Chef Boyardee's canned pasta, which was included as part of soldiers' rations during World War II. The brand was sold to a major food distributing company after the war and marketed to civilians. Although it's decades later, with Chef Boyardee products still available for purchase at most supermarkets, 1965 remains notable as it saw the debut of SpaghettiOs. The concept proved so popular in the early stages of testing that the brand skipped ahead and began distributing cans nationally in October 1965. It was also the year the brand's iconic slogan debuted, meaning that ready-to-eat canned noodles truly marked the middle of the decade.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs.
The drinking man's diet began in 1964 when Robert Cameron started selling a pamphlet of the same name for $1, touting a diet that allowed participants to both drink and lose weight. Cameron's theory was rooted in the idea that liquors like whiskey or gin have trace amounts of carbohydrates, so hypothetically, a person can have as much meat and seafood as they want alongside a stiff drink and still lose weight. The boozy diet is far from healthy or safe, but it sure was popular. The Drinking Man's Diet sold more than 2.4 million copies in 13 languages just 2 years after its release. After hitting store shelves in 1966, Easy Cheese forever changed the way we think of cheese and crackers. In its early years, the brand tried to tell everyone that Easy Cheese can go on everything from vegetables to hard-boiled eggs. There were even recipes for cocktail party appetizers using spray cheese, which was supposed to be somewhat gourmet at the time. For those with a particular taste for spray cheese, Easy Cheese branding even claimed that the stuff was good on fresh fruit. Now that's an adventurous palate. Freeze-dried food has been key for backpackers for decades, but the height of freeze-dried food's popularity undoubtedly came during the space race of the 1960s. Why not eat what the astronauts eat? NASA helped advance freeze-drying technology, but as popular as astronaut ice cream may be in gift shops, it only ever made it to space during the 1968 Apollo 7 mission. It turns out freeze-dried ice cream isn't very appetizing or practical, making it more of a novelty item than a must-have for space travelers. The 1970s would be nothing without fondue, as chic parties brought people together over gooey cheese. There's nothing overly complicated about melting down cheese and dipping food in it. It's the act that makes it special, as it prompts conversation and connection among those gathered around the pot. Fondue was part of exhibits sponsored by Swiss Industries during the 1964 World's Fair in New York. A dish that started as a simple way to use up stale bread ended up marking the 1970s almost as much as disco or feathered hair.
Excellent.
The 1970s were cheesy in more ways than one, which is perhaps why cheese balls were also popular appetizers of the decade. These aren't the type of cheese balls you buy in a bag from 7-Eleven. These are spheres of spiced cream cheese coated with herbs, nuts, seeds, fruit, and more. It's a surprisingly delectable combination of creamy and crunchy, especially when served alongside crackers or fresh vegetables. Cheese balls come in and out of style every few decades, but the 1970s were definitely its heyday. The U.S. bicentennial celebrations of the mid-1970s resulted in quite a few unique recipes, such as ham and banana hollandaise from McCall's Great American Recipe Card collection. The name doesn't leave much up for interpretation, which might be a bad thing. It features baked bananas topped with mustard and ham and drenched in hollandaise sauce. It's hard to say whose palate this is supposed to satisfy, but you'd be hard-pressed to find a modern-day rendition of this dish in a fancy restaurant. These days, instant potatoes is a taboo among foodies, given that it doesn't live up to the real thing in flavor or texture. But in the early 1970s, Smash brand instant potatoes were a popular and convenient dinner staple. Smash wasn't much different from other brands, but it's fondly remembered for its intergalactic ads that featured robots and aliens. Most kids from the 1970s likely have the Smash ads burned deep into their brains, even if the potatoes themselves weren't very noteworthy.
On your last trip, did you discover what the Earth people eat? They eat a great many of these.
Blue Nun wine might not be recognizable to anyone born after the 1990s, but it was once the white wine of rock stars. The German wine was created in the 1920s, but it peaked in the 1980s when it sold millions of cases annually. The white wine was sweet, inexpensive, and low in alcohol content, making it palatable to novice wine drinkers. The smirking nun on the label and blue bottle made it all the more recognizable. Blue Nun is ridiculous for its novelty, but may be remembered fondly by those who used to order it as their drink of choice. Watergate salad is one of the most non-traditional salads in history, combining pistachio pudding mix, canned pineapple, marshmallows, whipped cream, and chopped nuts. As you might expect, the salad gets its name from the infamous Watergate scandal and was preceded by a pistachio cake named after Watergate as well. It isn't exactly appetizing to behold, though, which probably contributed to its decline. Making a strange salad is certainly one way to cope with a dark political situation. Cheese and pineapple hedgehogs were a 1970s phenomenon, particularly in the United Kingdom. It starts with a base shaped like a hedgehog body, like a lemon or slice of watermelon wrapped in foil. Then you cover the foil with toothpicks that each have one piece of cheese and pineapple. Other fruits and vegetables can be used as well. 2 eyes and a nose made of cherries, berries, or grapes put the icing on the cake of this wacky party dessert that isn't practical but was certainly a conversation piece in the 1970s. The phenomenon of salad bars swept America as the country transitioned from the 1970s to the 1980s. In the new decade, salad bars were popping up in restaurants, grocery stores, and all sorts of unexpected places with seemingly more topping options than ever.
The Plots Are Us mortuary service. Remember, there's always plenty of free parking. And don't forget to visit our new salad bar.
Wendy's launched a salad bar concept in 1979, and Burger King shortly followed. The idea forever revolutionized meal prep and the experience of going out to lunch. It was a good time to be a vegetarian in America. If you thought party food in the 1970s was weird, just take a look at the holiday party sandwich loaves of the 1980s. The concept of this dish was to make a sandwich that resembled a cake and could feed a crowd. The inside consisted of layers of white bread with various fillings, usually something of the time, like ham, egg, or olive salad. Then the entire loaf was frosted with cream cheese, cottage cheese, or mayonnaise. The loaf was sliced like cake, which proved visually impressive, but not the most appetizing way to eat a sandwich. Snacks in the 1980s were a category all their own, like the phenomenon that is hot buttered Cheerios. These are simply pan-toasted Cheerios cooked in butter and salt. Plain Cheerios were a staple in this recipe, although Honey Nut Cheerios would probably provide more of a sweet and salty flavor profile. An official 1982 ad promoted hot buttered O's, so this wasn't just a word-of-mouth recipe. It's one of the few throwback foods you can easily still eat today, and use as a base for creative variations with different Cheerios flavors. Every decade comes with its own health fads, and the 1980s had people all in on Bran. The high-fiber grain was often eaten via bran muffins. Many public campaigns were touting the ability of oat bran to help lower cholesterol and increase life expectancy. We know that you can't totally transform your health by adding just one food into your diet, but bran muffins are still just as healthy all these years later. Often called one of the biggest marketing mistakes of all time, New Coke is a product that no one asked for but everyone got. Coca-Cola tried to fix something that wasn't broken by reformulating its flagship soda. resulting in protests, people hoarding cases of old Coke, and thousands of angry phone calls to brand headquarters. The company quickly started selling the classic formula again once it became clear that the stunt was a flop. But anyone who lived through the 1980s probably still remembers the new Coke chaos.
Do you want new Coke, Classic Coke, Cherry Coke, Diet Coke, or caffeine-free Coke?
Crisco is still available, but in the 1980s it completely transformed home cooking. The original Crisco formula was full of trans fat, meaning it fell out of popularity when people learned about its negative health impacts. At the time, those effects weren't known. In 1986, Burger King was praised for cooking with supposedly healthy, partially hydrogenated oils. With the neutral taste and long shelf life of Crisco, the average 1980s cook had plenty of reason to swap butter or lard for the seemingly magic ingredient. Wine coolers are often the first alcoholic drink people try. In the late 1980s, the colorful bottles were all the rage. They were invented at the beginning of the decade and saw more than $1 billion in sales in 1987. Usually, old-school wine coolers featured white wine and fruity, cheap soda with plenty of bubbles. It was the early rendition of the ready-to-drink canned cocktail options we have today, cementing its place in beverage history. Jolt Cola was the soda for thrill seekers as it contained real sugar and twice the caffeine of a regular soft drink. Since its 1986 release, it became a cult favorite for rebellious people looking for a taste of what's bad for them. Jolt was created in direct response to major soda companies that were busy debuting diet, caffeine-free, and sugar-free versions of their drinks. Jolt was popular enough that it made appearances in 1990s films like Wayne's World and Jurassic Park before it fell by the wayside in the 2000s amidst the sea of high-caffeine energy drinks.
I think I had too much Jolt Cola.
First invented in 1988, Lunchables have been a major part of school lunches for decades. The convenience and novelty of kids assembling their own lunches was a major draw to customers, even though the brand was initially made to get more people to eat more Oscar Mayer bologna after it fell out of favor. More than $200 million of Lunchables were sold in its first year. They've reigned supreme ever since, especially after the beloved pizza version was introduced in the 1990s. Warheads are more of a candy challenge than they are an indulgent treat. The sour candy, which was invented in Taiwan in 1975 but didn't make it to the US until the 1990s, is not for those with picky palates thanks to a secret outer coating on every piece. Warheads have long been the first choice for friends trying to impress each other with food-based dares. The act of torturing yourself with extremely sour candy was a rite of passage for many 90s kids. For many, the Easy Bake Oven was a favorite toy growing up because it could produce actual food. It was invented in the 1960s and sold by Kenner, but it saw great success in the 1990s with the expansion of baking recipe sets created in partnership with major food brands. In 1991, toy company Hasbro took over Kenner and started a resurgence. In 1993, Easy Bake Oven revamped its design to resemble a mini microwave with even more recipe options in honor of the brand's 30th anniversary. Nothing screams kids' food more like Fruit Gushers. The brand changed the fruit snack game by filling their gummy treats with explosive liquid for a wacky eating experience when they debuted in the early 1990s. Many 90s kids will remember some of the wild ads that aired on channels like Nickelodeon, featuring kids turning into living pieces of fruit after they bite into the candy. In fact, the allure of the snack might have been more enticing than the treat itself. Anyone who lived in the 1990s will remember everyone's seemingly random obsession with pesto. Pesto isn't a ridiculous ingredient by itself, but the public's sudden fascination with it sure was.
I don't like pesto. Where was pesto 10 years ago?
Italian-American food became seriously popular in this decade, marked by cookbooks like 1992's Essentials of Italian Cooking. Non-Italian cooks were clearly fascinated by this nutty, basil-based sauce. While some home cooks and restaurant chefs made fresh pesto, the early 1990s also saw more jarred pesto varieties popping up on grocery store shelves, making it even easier for people to get their hands on the green stuff. Strawberry and kiwi are both excellent flavors, but people only seemed to realize how well the two go together in the early 1990s. That was when Snapple introduced the public to the flavor, which became the brand's most popular in 1995. It soon started being produced by other drink brands like Capri Sun and Arizona. Strawberry-kiwi is perhaps not as popular now as it was back then, but it's still present in plenty of products to remind people about the heady drink days of the 90s. Cosmopolitans, Appletinis, espresso martinis, the 1990s were all about mixing vodka with whatever, pouring it into a glass and adding teeny to the name. Flavored martinis were all the rage at the time, and they've made a comeback recently. The classic martini might be gin and vermouth with a twist, but 1990s drinkers loved vodka and anything it would mix with to make it look fancy. Other drinks of the moment were the somewhat forgotten breakfast martini and the raunchy porn star martini, both with enough booze to make you blush like the color of your drink.
Well, who wants a martini?
No dessert exemplifies 1990s fine dining more than chocolate lava cake, a lush, decadent treat with a molten center that would burn your tongue if you didn't give it a minute to cool. The dish found its footing in 1980s restaurants and would end up becoming truly inescapable just 10 years later. Nowadays, it's still common to see restaurants offer a version of chocolate lava cake, but the dish fell out of fashion in the 2000s, along with many of the fads from the previous decade. Squeezable yogurt in a tube could only be a brainchild of the 1990s, which is why the invention of Go-Gurt makes so much sense. It was geared toward kids who were clearly on the move and couldn't be bothered to stop and eat a snack with a spoon.
Hey, lose the spoon.
New Yoplait Go-Gurt, the grab and go yogurt.
Go-Gurt became widely available in 1998. It was easily recognizable in the refrigerator aisle thanks to its bright green box adorned with various popular franchises of the time. Culinary foam is a controversial subject, but there's no denying that its main goal is to get people talking about food. Chef Ferran Adria wowed 1990s diners by incorporating savory culinary foams into his dishes. The trick took off in fine dining restaurants across the globe, but became cliché by the end of the 2000s. Now, foam is still here and there on restaurant menus, but it never had another major moment like it did at the end of the 20th century. Y2K kicked off with a bang thanks to Heinz totally butchering the humble condiment that is ketchup. In July 2000, the brand released its Easy Squirt ketchup, which came in unnatural colors like green and purple. It was a gimmicky attempt to reinvigorate ketchup, but visually it was a bit unappetizing. The green ketchup was the first to debut in a promotion for the animated film Shrek, but the novelty wore off by 2006 when Easy Squirt was discontinued. For 90s kids, though, this condiment remains hard to forget. Red Bull has been around since the 1980s, but it didn't make its US debut until the late 1990s. In the 2000s, Red Bull became a popular mixer for clubbers who wanted a caffeine boost to fuel long nights.
I had a couple Red Bulls. You ever had a Red Bull? I never had a Red Bull before, but I had a Red Bull last night. I really like Red Bull.
By 2001, Red Bull celebrated its billionth can sold, and it was just getting started. The massive interest in energy drinks led to the creation of Monster in 2002. The beginning of the decade also saw the birth of the 5-hour energy shot. While experts have raised concerns about the health risks of too many energy drinks, it wasn't enough to stop determined partygoers and night owls who ran on the stuff. In the early 2000s, it seemed like everyone was on a low-carb diet. The Atkins diet, which promotes eating little to no carbs and plenty of protein and fat, has been around since the 1960s. However, the diet culture of the early 2000s led to renewed interest in low-carb diets meant to help people lose weight quickly while still being able to consume cheese, meat, and butter. The South Beach diet, which also promotes restricting carbs, came about in 2003, even though the low-carb trend was already in full force among fad dieters. There was a period in the early 2000s when bacon seemed to appear in and on everything. The cookbook Everything Tastes Better with Bacon was released in 2002, while in 2003, retail bacon sales reached more than $2 billion. Americans simply couldn't get enough of the stuff. It wasn't just bacon on pizza and burgers, it was on donuts, in milkshakes, and even dipped in chocolate. The boom played itself out after a few years, but not until after the bacon trend expanded into merchandise that included bacon-themed clothing and bacon-flavored everything. Every fall, it seems as if pumpkin spice mania is upon us yet again. The early 2000s were an extra special time for pumpkin spice as Starbucks first released its famous pumpkin spice latte in 2003. The drink remains a popular seasonal fad, but it was a true phenomenon those first few years as everyone discovered the warm embrace of a PSL.
Look, we didn't invent spice, that was Marco Polo. We didn't invent the pumpkin, probably the Egyptians. What we did do is we introduced pumpkin to spice.
The flavor also had a viral moment when the internet realized that there was no actual pumpkin in a pumpkin spice latte, because the flavor comes from the mix of seasonings used to flavor pumpkin pie. Starbucks has since added actual pumpkin puree to the drink mix. It was around 2005 when we all got way too obsessed with cupcakes. Most people point to a Sex and the City episode as the culprit, as Carrie and Miranda met up at the now famous Magnolia Bakery to munch on dainty cupcakes with perfectly piped frosting. Perhaps it's that one scene that helped vault cupcakes into food trend stardom. 2005 was also the year the famous Sprinkles cupcake bakery opened its doors, expanding the public's perception of cupcakes as more than kids' birthday party treats. The widespread popularity of cupcakes was long-lasting, leading to the 2009 premiere of Cupcake Wars on Food Network. Green smoothies definitely have plenty of health food benefits, but the fad of drinking them was more of a rite of passage than an enjoyable snack when they first debuted in the 2000s. There wasn't one particular green smoothie recipe that was particularly popular at the time. Instead, most involved adding run-of-the-mill green vegetables into the blender with more typical smoothie ingredients like bananas or strawberries. The idea of adding ingredients like spinach or avocado to bump up the nutrients was all the rage for several years.
I do not miss the green smoothies.
Starbucks is as popular of a chain these days as McDonald's or Subway, but back in 2008 was when it really became a sensation. Starbucks opened its first store in Seattle back in the 1970s, and the 2000s saw an expansion of shops and marketing efforts from the brand. 2008 was a special year for Starbucks because it saw the release of Pike Place Roast, the brand's top-selling coffee roast. Between 2001 and 2010, Starbucks opened more than 12,000 new cafes and became one of the first chains to offer free Wi-Fi to its customers. Thanks to TV shows like Cake Boss and Ace of Cakes, many parents felt the pressure to either bake or buy elaborate cakes for their kids' birthday celebrations and beyond. Extreme cakes were all the rage at the end of the first decade of the 2000s, when the public learned that a celebration dessert can be much more than a regular sheet cake with sprinkles. 2009 was the year that really kicked off the ridiculous fad of extreme cakes, as that was the year that the ultra-popular Cake Boss series premiered on TLC. Kale is another innocuous ingredient that became a food craze at the start of the 2010s. Kale is a dense leafy green with tons of nutrients, but suddenly people started putting it in everything. Kale production in the US grew 60% between 2007 and 2012 to keep up with the demand for kale smoothies, kale chips, and kale salads. The ridiculous fad can be blamed on savvy PR work courtesy of the American Kale Association, which pushed grocery shoppers into believing that kale needed to be included in every dish possible.
Guess what the new spinach is?
Radicchio?
Kale.
No!
I know, I was just as blown away as you are.
Many 21st century food trends have involved the public becoming hyper-fixated on a particular dessert food. One such baked good was the cake pop, an invention that made dining on cake resemble the experience of eating candy. Cake pops may have been a reaction to the extreme cake trend, as they are relatively easy to make and eat in one bite. The treat was popularized by food blogger Angie Dudley in 2008, who started selling branded cake pops in 2010. The treats quickly became popular enough to take over cupcakes as the baked good of the moment. Frozen yogurt wasn't exactly a food fad of the 2010s necessarily, but the act of going to the yogurt shop was a common pastime. Popular chains like Pinkberry and Menchie's got their start in the 2000s, and it took a few years for self-serve froyo to have its major moment. The number of frozen yogurt stores in the US more than doubled between 2009 and 2014, when sales continued to increase year by year. Peak popularity came in 2012, after which the craze died down significantly. However, many people still remember the years around 2012 as ones where they hung out at froyo shops with friends.
People love frozen yogurt. I don't know what to tell you.
It took a while for a worthy drink to truly compete with coffee as the supreme morning beverage. Then Americans caught wind of matcha. Part of the craze can be attributed to a 2015 Instagram post from Gwyneth Paltrow, who raved about her love of the green powder made from tea leaves. Matcha has been a staple in Japan for centuries, but it took US consumers a bit longer to catch on. Some people were likely influenced by social media to try matcha and keep up with the trends, but were quick to go back to their daily cup of coffee to fuel their mornings. Others were permanently hooked. One of the most prevalent food trends of the 2010s was the explosion of avocado toast. By 2016, countless people in the US had discovered that avocado tastes amazing smashed on toast, meaning that brunch would never be the same. It was so popular that an Australian millionaire suggested that millennials stop buying expensive avocado toast and focus on trying to buy a home instead, a quip that soon became its own viral sensation. Avocado toast is one of the first food trends that was largely fueled by social media, which ultimately changed the way food becomes trendy. Speaking of breaking the internet, 2017 was the year many people logged onto Instagram and found themselves staring at a photo of black soft-serve ice cream. That's because activated charcoal was the trendiest food additive of summer 2017. The odd-looking dessert inspired people to try using activated charcoal in more dishes for dramatic effect, especially since the charcoal is practically tasteless. The trend quickly died out once health concerns arose over how much activated charcoal can be ingested, especially for people who require medication. Still, thanks to its dramatic look, it's a food fad that will never be fully forgotten. Out of the charcoal darkness came rainbows. Unicorn food was made to catch the attention of Instagram users scrolling through their feeds. Whether it was the introduction of rainbow bagels in 2015 or the 2017 debut of Starbucks' unicorn frappuccinos, the late 2010s were all about eating the rainbow, regardless of whether or not it was natural. It was totally fueled by social media users looking to garner attention for their cute food creations. But with all those food dyes and mix-ins, it was never practical enough to be a long-lasting concept. Freak shakes were another impractical late 2010s fad that was made solely for views. This dessert is basically a loaded milkshake topped with anything and everything sweet, like candy, whipped cream, fruit, and even baked goods. The internet stopped at nothing when it came to its freak shake creations, often putting entire slices of cake or cones of cotton candy on top of their milkshakes. Huge freak shakes were never going to be a common after-meal dessert, mainly due to the massive amounts of sugar and calories per serving involved, not to mention the effort and ingredients required to assemble one. That said, you might be able to find one on a restaurant menu today if you look hard enough, or just throw half of your pantry into a glass. 2020 was a strange year, as the COVID-19 pandemic had people stuck at home, spending a lot more time in their kitchens. One popular fad at the beginning of the pandemic was Dalgona whipped coffee, which got its start on TikTok. The recipe isn't much different than your average latte, but the execution adds more interesting textures to the coffee-based drink. The craze seemingly died down as quickly as it popped up, but there are more than a few people out there who still enjoy a homemade Dalgona every once in a while. TikTok has been a major factor in developing food trends of the 2020s, and the year that everyone started turning any dish into a charcuterie board was no exception.
What's that?
No time to explain charcuterie, pal.
Charcuterie boards have been popular on social media for a while. They're visually appealing and appetizing after all, but in 2021, it was a bit much. That was when people started to make board versions of almost everything, including brunch, hot wings, and even fast food menu items. People even started hosting board parties where guests would bring themed boards to share with friends. Perhaps the trend faded because it's not in line with the true definition of charcuterie, and seems more like it was created as an excuse for people to play with their food. You probably weren't born in 2022 if you made it this far, but nevertheless, there was no weird food trend to mark the year quite like the pink sauce. After it went viral on TikTok, people became fascinated with the homemade sauce that somehow had a hot pink hue. The launch of the sauce wasn't without some social media drama after its creator Veronica Shaw was accused of poor food safety practices. Eventually, the FDA stepped in, but Shaw was never fined and is now legally in the clear. Now that it's been sorted out, people can actually buy pink sauce at certain retail locations, usually not looking so pink.